The moment my mum told me to wait by the airport gate while she disappeared with her new husband, I thought it was just a quick errand, maybe checking luggage or grabbing coffee. But the minutes stretched into hours, and that sinking feeling settled into my chest like ice water. She wasn't coming back. Not for me. Not that day. Not ever in the same way. I was 15, holding a cheap plastic carry-on with all my clothes stuffed inside, a boarding pass that no longer mattered, and a knot in my throat that made breathing painful. She had promised me this trip was going to be a fresh start, that I'd get to see new places and finally feel like part of her life again. But when she saw the chance to board a luxury vacation with her new husband, first-class tickets, champagne, Instagram photos waiting to happen, she decided I was excess baggage, something too heavy to carry into her shiny new future. People walked past me with their families, hugging, laughing, snapping pictures, and I stood there frozen, like a ghost in a crowd, invisible except for the burning humiliation that made my skin feel too tight. I kept checking the departure board, pretending I still had a reason to be there, that any moment she'd wave from across the terminal with an apologetic smile. But my phone buzzed with the truth instead. A single text saying, "You'll understand one day. Don't make this harder." My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't forgotten. I was discarded, deliberately, as if my existence was negotiable. It wasn't the abandonment itself that cut the deepest. It was the casual cruelty of it. The idea that she thought I'd understand. That night, sitting alone under the cold fluorescent lights of the terminal, I began to understand far more than she ever intended, and that knowledge would shape the rest of my life in ways she couldn't control. I tried to convince myself she'd come back after the vacation, that maybe this was some kind of horrible mistake or a selfish impulse she would regret. But as the days turned into weeks, reality carved itself deeper. She never called, never texted, never even asked if I made it home safely. My aunt, the only person who still answered my cries for help, scraped together enough money to buy me a bus ticket so I wouldn't be stranded. And when I walked into her small apartment with swollen eyes and a suitcase that looked bigger than me, she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me in a blanket and let me cry until I had no tears left. At school, I learned to paste on a mask, pretending everything was fine, while rumors spread about how my mum was living her best life, on yachts, in resorts, posting pictures with her husband and cocktails, her hair shining under the sun, while I was folding thrift store clothes to earn a few dollars. It's hard to explain the kind of anger that grows inside you when the person who gave you life flaunts their freedom as if you're nothing more than a forgotten obligation, like a bill they threw in the trash. Every birthday after that became a reminder. No phone calls, no cards, no gifts, just silence that grew louder every year, while her social media screamed about vacations in Bali, shopping trips in Paris, luxury hotels in Dubai. People asked me if I ever wanted to reach out, to forgive, to reconnect, but they didn't understand. Forgiveness requires at least a trace of remorse on the other side, and she had none. She abandoned me, not because she was desperate, not because she had no choice, but because it was easier to enjoy her luxury vacation without a teenage daughter holding her back. And in that clarity, I began to plan, quietly, patiently, knowing one day she would come back into my orbit. Not because she missed me, but because people like her always circle back when they need something. That day, I promised myself I wouldn't be the helpless 15-year-old waiting in an airport anymore. Years passed, and I grew into someone she wouldn't recognize. Not the timid girl left standing by the terminal doors, but a woman who had built her own life piece by piece. I studied harder than anyone else because I knew no one was going to hand me opportunities. Every scholarship I won felt like spitting in the face of her abandonment. I worked nights in diners, learned how to budget every cent, and when classmates bragged about vacations, I kept quiet, channeling that bitterness into something sharper, something useful. By 21, I had my own apartment, small and worn down, but mine, with bills I paid myself, and a lock she had no key to. Still, her shadow lingered, not in presence, but in whispers. I'd hear from distant relatives how she and her husband were thriving, how they had opened a chain of boutique hotels, how she flaunted her life as though motherhood had never been a chapter in it. And then, one afternoon, she did exactly what I had predicted years earlier. She showed up, not at my door, of course. Cowards never face you head on. Instead, she messaged me after nearly 7 years of silence, acting like nothing had happened. "Sweetheart, I've missed you so much. We should talk. Family is all we have in the end." Reading those words made my stomach churn, because I could see right through her. She wasn't reaching out from love. She was reaching out from need. I ignored her at first, but she was persistent, sending pictures of herself at charity galas, dropping hints about how complicated things had become with her husband's business, weaving a narrative where I was suddenly important again, not because she cared, but because I had value she wanted to exploit. Sitting in my tiny kitchen, staring at those messages, I felt the weight of every sleepless night I had endured alone, every humiliation, every sacrifice. And I knew this was the beginning of my chance to finally turn the tables. She asked to meet for coffee, like we were some estranged friends who had lost touch, and against my better judgment I agreed. Not out of hope, but curiosity. When I walked into the cafe, she looked almost exactly like her Instagram photos. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She opened with theatrics, gasps about how grown up I was, how beautiful, as if she deserved credit for any of it. I let her talk, sipping my coffee in silence, until she finally revealed her real reason for being there. Her husband's hotel business had run into unexpected financial setbacks, and she was trying to put together an investment group. That's when I understood. She had no idea who I had become. Through scholarships, relentless work, and my aunt's unwavering support, I had climbed into a career in finance, working with numbers and contracts every day, and I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving quietly, with enough savings and connections to make me useful to someone like her. She leaned across the table, her hand brushing mine, like she could recreate a maternal bond, and whispered, "If you could just help us for a little while, things will turn around. It's family, darling. We always help family." Family. The word tasted bitter, but I swallowed it down and smiled, nodding like I was considering it, because in that moment, I realized the universe had delivered her back to me, not for reconciliation, but for justice. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to do what she never expected. Let her believe she still had power, while I slowly took every piece of it away. I played along carefully, never showing my hand too soon. I told her I'd see what I could do, and over the next few weeks she flooded me with calls, emails, invitations to dinners, where she paraded me in front of her wealthy friends as if she'd raised me into this capable woman. She left out the part where she abandoned me at 15 in an airport. Of course, to them I was her brilliant daughter who had always been destined for success. And I sat there with a polite smile, letting her bask in the reflected glow of a life she never contributed to. What she didn't realize was that I was collecting information about her finances, her husband's crumbling hotels, their desperate need for investors to cover debts they had buried under glossy marketing. Every time she boasted, she handed me another piece of evidence. Eventually, she made the mistake of asking me to co-sign a loan, trying to use my clean record and credibility to prop up their sinking empire. That was the moment I knew the trap had fully closed. I told her I'd think about it, but instead, I went to my contacts, people who respected me, people who knew my story, and laid everything bare. Together, we set up conditions so sharp and binding that when she finally signed the paperwork, thinking it was her salvation, she effectively transferred control of her husband's failing company into my hands. The look on her face when the lawyers explained it was everything I had waited for. Confusion melting into horror, horror twisting into rage, and finally that brittle smile, cracking into the silence she had left me with years ago. And for the first time since I was 15, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt powerful. She tried to fight it, of course, hurling accusations, calling me ungrateful, saying I had misunderstood the documents. But the signatures were hers, the contracts airtight, and the witnesses unimpeachable. Her husband, red-faced and sweating, through his tailored suit, turned on her almost immediately, demanding how she could have been so careless. Watching them unravel in that lawyer's office was like watching a play I had already memorized, every scene unfolding exactly as I had, rehearsed in my mind for years. She begged me to reconsider, dropping her pride in seconds, her voice trembling as she said, "Please don't do this. I'm still your mother." But those words no longer carried weight. They were empty syllables, powerless against the years of silence and pain she had left me to choke on. I leaned forward, calm and steady, and told her the truth. Mothers don't abandon their daughters in airports. You made your choice, and now I've made mine. The papers stood. The company was mine. They walked out of that office broken, their empire crumbling at their feet, while I stayed behind, signing the final pages that secured everything. And in that moment, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt closure. For once, she needed me more than I had ever needed her. And she would never escape the reminder that the daughter she discarded at 15 had come back not for forgiveness, but for justice. News of the takeover spread quickly, and within months her glittering facade collapsed. The boutique hotels that once graced glossy magazines were suddenly under my management, and I stripped away the illusions she had built. I cut off the lavish spending, exposed the hidden debts, and redirected the business into something sustainable, something real. No more champagne parties and fabricated success stories, just hard work and rebuilding. Employees who had once feared layoffs now had stability, and investors who had been misled finally saw transparency. Meanwhile, she and her husband were left with nothing but their reputations in shambles, their invitations to high society events rescinded, their so-called friends evaporating overnight. I saw her once more after that, not in a glamorous cafe or at a staged dinner, but standing outside one of the hotels she no longer owned, her designer bag clutched like a lifeline, her eyes darting nervously as if searching for someone to blame. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation, but I didn't flinch. I simply walked past her, the keys jingling in my hand, the same hand that once clutched a cheap carry-on in an airport where she left me to fend for myself. That was the full circle. The daughter she abandoned was now the woman who held the empire she tried to build on lies. And as I stepped through the doors, I realized revenge didn't come from shouting or demanding answers. It came from living, long enough to make sure they saw me thrive while their world fell apart. She tried reaching out again, but this time her messages weren't sugar-coated with sweetheart or darling. They were raw, frantic, angry. She accused me of betraying her, of ruining her life out of spite, as though the years she erased me never existed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence had become my sharpest weapon. The same silence she once used against me when I was a teenager, staring at an empty phone screen, waiting for a call that never came. Now it was her turn to wait, to wonder, to feel the echo of abandonment. Word traveled among family, and some distant relatives tried to intervene, telling me to be the bigger person, to forgive because blood is blood. But they weren't there the night I sat alone in that airport. They weren't there for birthdays that passed like ghost days, forgotten on purpose. They hadn't seen her look me in the eye at that cafe and pretend the past never happened, all while plotting how to use me. I had no intention of giving her another chance to write me out of her life the moment it suited her. Instead, I focused on what I had built, the company I now steered, the employees who trusted me, the stability I had carved from the ashes of her recklessness. At night, when the office lights dimmed and the city stretched quiet outside my window, I thought back to that 15-year-old girl with trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks. I wished I could tell her that one day she wouldn't just survive. She would stand tall enough to make the woman who left her feel small. And that thought alone was enough. The years that followed became a study in contrast between the life she had once envisioned for herself and the reality I forced her to face. She and her husband, stripped of the company's resources, tried to reinvent themselves with smaller ventures. A boutique clothing line, a pop-up travel agency. But none of it stuck. Their reputation was ruined. Investors whispered about their recklessness, and soon no one wanted to touch their projects. I, on the other hand, used the company as my platform, expanding carefully, securing partnerships she had only ever dreamed about, and doing it with integrity. For the first time, the name she once flaunted wasn't associated with her selfies and cocktails. It was associated with my work, my vision, my steady hand. And still, she couldn't stay away. Every few months she appeared in my orbit, whether through a message, a letter, or even showing up outside corporate events like a ghost from the past. She never came with humility. Instead, it was always a twisted combination of anger and desperation, blaming me for her downfall, accusing me of being cold, reminding me I owed her my very existence. Once, she cornered me outside a conference hall, her voice rising as she spat. "I brought you into this world, and this is how you repay me." The crowd around us pretended not to listen, but I could feel their eyes, their curiosity. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her, calm, steady, and said, "Mothers don't abandon their daughters in airports." The words silenced her more effectively than any shouting match ever could. She froze, her face paling, and for the first time I saw the crack in her armor, the truth she had spent years running from. That confrontation should have left me shaken, but instead, it solidified everything. I had no obligation to carry her guilt, no responsibility to heal the wounds she inflicted. My revenge wasn't just taking control of the company or exposing her lies. It was proving to myself that I could stand on my own, stronger than she ever believed I would. Late at night, when the city outside was nothing but glittering lights, I sometimes thought about that 15-year-old girl again, abandoned in a terminal with a buzzing phone and a single text. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that the pain would one day turn into a fire, strong enough to forge a woman who could turn abandonment into triumph. And as much as my mother tried to claw her way back into my life, I never let her, because the real power wasn't in destroying her. It was in never needing her again. She didn't disappear quietly. People like her never do. She tried lawsuits, claiming she had been tricked, dragging my name through gossip circles, insisting to anyone who would listen that I had manipulated her out of love. But paperwork doesn't lie, and every time she opened her mouth, another truth surfaced. Her negligence, her carelessness, her history of abandonment that no spin could erase. The courts dismissed her claims one after another, and with each failure, she grew smaller in the eyes of the world. Yet still she haunted me, not as a threat anymore, but as a reminder. I would see her face in tabloids, caught leaving restaurants, alone, or hear whispers that she was begging old acquaintances for money. There was a time when that might have given me satisfaction, but the deeper the years went, the more I realized her downfall wasn't mine to savor. It was hers to carry. What mattered was that she no longer had power over me. My company thrived, my life thrived, and I built something she could never touch. Stability, loyalty, trust, those were currencies she never invested in, and they were the ones that sustained me. Once, when I was asked in an interview what drove me, I smiled faintly and answered, resilience. The reporter leaned in, expecting some long-winded story, but I left it at that because the truth was too raw to lay bare in glossy pages. Resilience had carried me from an airport bench to a boardroom, from a forgotten teenager to a woman in full command of her own future. And though my mother may never admit what she did, I no longer need her confession. Her absence was my greatest teacher, and her choices became the blueprint for everything I refused to become. Sometimes I wonder if she lies awake at night, replaying that day at the airport, realizing that the moment she left me behind was the same moment she lost everything. Because that's the cruel irony of her story. She thought she was walking into luxury, but she was really walking away from the only person who would one day hold her fate in their hands. The final time I saw her, it wasn't in a lawyer's office or on the steps of some polished hotel, but in the most ordinary of places, a grocery store parking lot. I had just finished a long day at work, my car filled with bags, when I spotted her across the lot, fumbling with an old sedan that looked like it had seen better decades. She wasn't draped in designer fabrics anymore. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her clothes plain, her posture slumped with the weight of years she had never planned for. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The glamorous woman who once strutted through airports and luxury lobbies was gone. She noticed me, and in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Not arrogance, not rage, not entitlement, but shame. She started walking toward me, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I would turn and leave. I didn't move. And when she finally stood a few feet away, she whispered, "I made mistakes. I lost everything, but I never thought I'd lose you." There was a time when those words would have shattered me, when I would have grabbed onto them like a lifeline, desperate for even a shred of acknowledgement. But standing there, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the pavement, I realized they no longer held power. I didn't need her validation. I didn't need her apology. I had built a life where her presence, or absence, meant nothing to my survival. I looked at her, calm, steady, and said, "You lost me the day you left me in that airport." Then I turned, loaded the last bag into my car, and drove away. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't need to, because for the first time, there was no lingering ache, no unanswered question. There was only peace. And that was the truest revenge of all. Not that she was broken, not that I had risen, but that I no longer carried the weight of her choices. She abandoned me at 15, but at 30, I abandoned her right back. Not out of cruelty, but out of freedom. And in that freedom, I finally became whole. Years after that last encounter, I sometimes wondered what became of her, though not out of longing. More like curiosity, the way you wonder about a character in a book you closed long ago. I heard rumors through distant relatives that she had moved to a smaller town, taking odd jobs, living in a modest apartment that barely echoed the life she once flaunted. Some said her husband left her when the money dried up. Others whispered that he stayed, but only because they had no one else. Either way, their empire of luxury vacations, gala dinners, and perfect photographs had dissolved into the same silence she once handed me. And yet, I didn't hate her anymore. The anger that had burned so brightly in my teenage years had already done its work. It had fueled me, pushed me, carried me through the darkest nights. But it didn't define me anymore. My identity was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. It was the woman who had chosen herself, over and over again, until that choice became second nature. Sometimes, when I gave talks to young women in business or mentored interns who looked at me with the same hunger I once had, I told them pieces of my story. Not to shame her, not to dwell on the pain, but to remind them that survival can turn into strength, and strength can turn into freedom. The details varied depending on the audience, but the truth remained. No one gets to decide your worth except you. And as I closed my speeches, I always left them with the same line that had become my quiet mantra. Family is not defined by blood, it's defined by who shows up. My mother hadn't shown up for me, but my aunt had. Friends had. Mentors had. And I had shown up for myself every single day since that night in the airport. That was the legacy I chose to live with. Not abandonment, not revenge, but the steady, unshakable truth that I had become everything she thought I couldn't. By the time I turned 40, the story of my mother had become less of a wound and more of a scar, visible if you looked closely, but no longer tender to the touch. My company had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, not just profitable, but respected, built on principles she never valued: trust, accountability, loyalty. I traveled, but not the way she had, flaunting herself for cameras. I traveled to meet partners, to mentor young women starting businesses, to build connections that weren't based on vanity, but on shared goals. And every time I stepped into an airport, the same kind of place where she had once left me behind, I felt a strange sense of closure. What had once been a symbol of abandonment had become a symbol of movement, progress, power. I no longer saw myself as the girl stranded on a cold bench with a buzzing phone. I was the woman striding through terminals with purpose, boarding flights that carried me toward futures I had earned. Occasionally, someone would ask if I ever reconciled with her, if there had ever been a late-in-life reunion, but I always answered honestly, no, and that's okay, because reconciliation wasn't the goal. Survival was, growth was, peace was, and I had all three. The last I heard of her, she was living quietly, older now, health beginning to fade, still clinging to a life that had slipped through her fingers decades earlier. Maybe she regrets, maybe she doesn't. I'll never know, and I don't need to. The real ending to our story isn't whether she ever asked for forgiveness. It's that I no longer needed her to. My revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was becoming untouchable, unshakable, free. And when people look at me now, they don't see the girl who was abandoned at 15. They see the woman who built an empire from nothing, who turned betrayal into fuel, who chose herself and never looked back. That's my story. And if anyone asks me whether I regret not giving her another chance, my answer is simple. I gave myself the chance instead, and it was enough. There are nights when I sit on my balcony, city lights glittering below, like 1,000 possibilities, and I let myself breathe in the quiet. It's in those moments that the weight of the past feels furthest away, like a story I once lived, but no longer belonged to. I don't replay the airport scene anymore. Don't lie, awake wondering why she did it. Don't chase answers that would never satisfy me. Instead, I focus on what came after. The life I built from ashes. The people who became my chosen family. The victories no one thought I'd reach. My aunt is older now, her hair silver, her hands softer, and every time I visit her, I'm reminded that she, not my mother, was the one who deserved the title of family. She never abandoned me, never asked for anything in return, just gave me love when I had none left to give myself. And when she smiles at me, proud of the woman I've become, I realize that her faith was the seed my entire future grew from. That's the real inheritance I carry. Not wealth stolen or squandered, but resilience planted in me by someone who cared. I know people expect revenge stories to end with flames, with ruin, with an enemy destroyed. But the truth is, the greatest revenge is living so fully that their betrayal fades into irrelevance. My mother's name barely crosses my lips now. She's not my beginning or my end. She's just a shadow that lost its shape when I stepped fully into the light. If she ever thinks of me, I hope she realizes the irony. That leaving me behind in that airport didn't erase me, it made me. And the woman I became is someone she will never get to claim, never get to touch, never get to take credit for. That, more than anything, is her punishment. And my peace. Sometimes people ask me if I would change it. If I could go back to that airport bench at 15 and rewrite the story, would I want her to stay? And the truth is, I wouldn't. Because if she hadn't walked away, maybe I never would have learned what I was capable of. maybe I would have grown into someone dependent on scraps of affection, someone who mistook crumbs for love, someone still waiting on the approval of a woman who couldn't give it. Her leaving forced me to build a backbone of steel, to find my worth outside of anyone's validation. It taught me to recognize real love when it showed up. In my aunt, in my friends, in the people who stood beside me without condition. And it taught me that sometimes the people who give you life aren't the ones who give you living. That's a lesson I carry every day, in business and in my personal life. Knowing the difference between those who show up out of need and those who show up out of care. If I had the chance to speak to that 15-year-old version of me, sitting under fluorescent lights with a buzzing phone and a hollow chest, I'd tell her, you will survive this. More than survive, you'll thrive. And one day she'll need you, but you won't need her, because that's what happened. My mother came back, broken and desperate, hoping to reclaim what she threw away. And I met her not with anger, but with indifference. I didn't give her my forgiveness, because forgiveness is a gift, and she hadn't earned it. What I gave her was something sharper, the knowledge that her absence was no longer my wound. It was her legacy, and mine was freedom. So no, I wouldn't change it, because in losing her, I found myself. And that, in the end, is the only story that matters. By now, the memory of her is like a distant echo, faint, hollow, incapable of stirring the storms it once did. I don't carry her choices with me anymore. I carry my own. The empire I built stands as proof that abandonment doesn't define destiny, and every decision I make is rooted not in bitterness, but in clarity. I chose to rise. I chose to fight. I chose to turn silence into strength. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop asking why and start saying, so what? She left me. So what? I grew stronger. She tried to use me. So what? I outmaneuvered her. She lost everything. So what? That was her doing, not mine. The older I get, the more I realize revenge was never about destroying her. It was about freeing myself from the cage she put me in. And I did. I've built a life filled with people who actually deserve a place in it. People who show up. People who love without condition. My aunt, now frailer, still squeezes my hand with that same unshakable warmth. And when I look at her, I know she's the proof that motherhood isn't about biology. It's about presence. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a window and think of the girl at the airport. She's still there, frozen in time, suitcase clutched, eyes wet with disbelief. But I reach across the years in my mind, place a hand on her shoulder, and whisper, we made it. She didn't break us. And then the reflection shifts back to the woman I've become. Standing tall, unafraid, untouchable. That's the ending she never expected. The ending I earned. Not her daughter abandoned, but her daughter risen. And beyond her reach forever. When I think about legacy now, it isn't about companies, or wealth, or even the story of what my mother did to me. It's about the way I've chosen to show up for others. I mentor girls who remind me of myself at 15, carrying pain in silence, unsure if they matter. I look them in the eye and tell them they do. I fund scholarships in my aunt's name because she was the one who proved that even one steady hand can save a life. I create spaces in my company where people are valued not just for what they bring to the table, but for who they are as human beings. That's my revenge. Breaking the cycle. Refusing to let her abandonment echo forward into another generation. She thought she was freeing herself when she walked away from me. But in truth, she chained herself to a lifetime of regret, while I walked into freedom. I know one day her story will end quietly, without fanfare, without the applause she once chased. And maybe people will wonder if anyone will mourn her. But I've already made peace with that. My mourning ended years ago, in that airport terminal, replaced by resolve. I don't need her to give me closure, because I already took it. I don't need her to give me love, because I've built it elsewhere, stronger and deeper than she ever could. So when I step onto a plane now, carrying not fear, but purpose, I always pause for a moment before boarding. Not to look back, but to honor the girl I was. Because she survived what should have broken her. She turned abandonment into fuel, betrayal into clarity, pain into power, and every mile I fly is proof that no one, not even the woman who left me, gets to decide where my story ends. The truth is, my story with her ended a long time ago, but the story with myself is still being written every single day. I wake up each morning without the weight of wondering if I'm enough, because I already proved it to myself. I don't chase after apologies that will never come, and I don't waste energy trying to rewrite the past. Instead, I focus on the future I carved out of the wreckage she left behind. My company thrives, not because I was handed anything, but because I refused to let her decision define me. My relationships are strong because I learned the difference between people who stay and people who leave. And my peace is real because I no longer measure my worth against anyone else's choices. Sometimes, when I stand at a podium, speaking to an audience about resilience, I see faces soften, tears slip down cheeks, and I know my pain has been transformed into something bigger than me, into hope for someone else. That's how I win, not by watching her fail, but by watching others rise, because I dared to tell the truth. If she ever hears my name now, it will be through headlines that celebrate what I've built, what I've given back, what I've become. And maybe, in her quiet moments, she'll remember the airport, the suitcase, the choice she made, but I don't linger there anymore. My life is no longer a reaction to her absence. It's a testament to my presence, my strength, my voice, my survival, and that is something she can never take, never diminish, never touch. She abandoned me to chase a luxury vacation. I turned that abandonment into a lifetime of freedom. That's the ending she wrote for me without knowing. And I rewrote it into victory. As the years layered over the memory, I realized that her abandonment no longer defined me, but it did shape me. And the difference between those two truths was everything. It shaped my drive, my unwillingness to quit, my refusal to let silence swallow me. It shaped the way I loved others, fiercely and without condition, because I knew what it felt like to be left behind. But it did not define me, because I became more than her choices, more than her absence, more than her shadow. When I walk through the halls of the company that once bore her fingerprints, people don't whisper about her anymore. They talk about me, about the standards I set, about the opportunities I've created. I erased her name from the letterhead long ago, not out of spite, but out of necessity, because her legacy had no place in what I was building. Sometimes, though, I still see her ghost in small things. A woman at the airport pulling her child's hand a little too quickly. A laugh that sounds like hers in a crowded room. A perfume I once smelled on her wrist. Those moments don't stab anymore. They sting briefly, then pass. Because ghosts don't have power unless you give it to them. And I gave her power for too many years. Now I live fully in the present, in the choices I make every day, in the people I allow into my circle. And even as I move forward, I carry one quiet promise inside me. The story isn't just about how she left me. It's about how I never let that moment be the end. Looking back now, the airport at 15 feels like another lifetime. Yet I can still picture the hard chairs, the smell of burnt coffee, the way my heart cracked open when her message came through. That was the moment I thought my story had ended, before it even began. But standing here decades later, I see it differently. That was the moment my story truly started. Not hers, not ours, but mine. She abandoned me for luxury, for freedom, for the easy escape of a vacation, but I found something she never could: resilience, purpose, and a life untouched by her selfishness. I didn't just survive. I rose. I didn't just rebuild. I created something stronger than she ever dreamed of. And the greatest revenge wasn't taking her company, or watching her fall, or turning my back in that parking lot. It was living, fully, freely, without her, until her choices no longer held any power over me. So this is my ending. Not as the girl left behind, but as the woman who walked forward. Not broken, not bitter, but whole. Family, I've learned, isn't who gives you life, it's who stands by you when life tests you. My aunt stood, my friends stood, and most of all, I stood. That's the truth I carry now, and the legacy I will leave behind. She may have left me in that airport, but I walked out with something she could never take, my strength. And that strength has carried me further than her love ever could. Tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? Would you have given her another chance? Or would you have walked away too? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Because stories like mine are only the beginning.